Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube and you see a little link down below, you can click on it and you'll end up in Zoom. If you click on that link, you'll end up in Mukana. And at that point, you become one of our producers. You're defining what the show is with your questions and your votes. It's important to do both. Ask questions that come up for you. Pretty much any question around virtual or media production is fair game. And it's probably one of the best places in the world to ask it. So ask those questions. If you see questions that you're interested in already, then vote those questions up, and you can continue to discuss it in the chat as well. If you think you can answer the questions, you just need to be here early, 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's so we can do the mic checks and make sure you're ready for the show. If you're not sure you're ready for the show, then come in a little early. We open the doors at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and you can come in and make sure that your mic is ready and your cameras are ready, and just hang out with us. I can't promise anything in that hour, but we have a good time. But we're mostly waiting for you to come in and do a tech check. So definitely come in and figure those things out. First hour is generally a general discussion, things that we think are important to talk about. And then the second hour are things that we'd like to spend a little bit more time on. So this week we're going to, we have a couple more of the general purpose Q&A discussions than we normally do. We are going to talk about orchestra recording tomorrow on Tuesday. And a little typo in our thing. Todd Reynolds, who's here in the panel, is going to be hanging out and talking about what he does on the 17th, on Thursday. We'll have that in the email tomorrow. So he's going to be talking about that and the Remotes on Friday, releasing a new song. So they'll be here talking about it. But we'll have general discussion on Monday and Wednesday. So and then on Saturday we have an education hour, which we then chat about education. That's not on YouTube, but we're all having a good time talking through it. It's gotten to be a really good discussion. All right, Bill, let's go ahead and jump into the questions.
All right. First one comes this morning from panelist Jim Hankins in Deerfield, Michigan, who says, could panelist Karl Asmussen once again describe his just-in-time Keynote slide creation?
Karl?
Okay, so generally what will happen is I'll look at the questions and, there'll be like 1 in 10, 1 in 8 questions that I think I can contribute to because it's something I've used or something I know about. And then I'll go find that product, usually on an American website, so I can get the American price. So like B&H, Sweetwater, something like that. And then what I'll do is I'll go into Keynote, start with the blank slide. And then the first thing I'll do is I'll just add a nice background so it's a bit more pleasing to look. And then I'll add in the images. So I'll bring in the images, and these images that sometimes I can get, like these ones from Behringer, are actually already alphaed. So they're marketing images already alphaed, which is quite nice. I don't have to go and do the instant alpha, but you can do the instant alpha as well. So once I go and add in all the images, I'll go check out the current American prices, and I'll add them in as well. So, and I'll make sure that that generally I'll put in the recommended retail price sometimes if I notice there's a special on, just to give people an understanding of what it is.
It's great. That's a really great thing. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Are there presets that you're using that you've kind of already built, Karl, that for like the sliding in or that kind of like single letter typing out thing that you're doing, or is that just something built into Keynote automatically?
So that was something I created to show Husmuk actually. So Husmuk asked me, and I said, like, these are the ones that can work with the Luma key in the background. So what I actually showed you was something that didn't involve fades or dissolves. So you can work with a black Luma key. So that's something I've noticed as well. So that was a little demonstration I showed Husmuk, with some other products as well.
But all those motions are all stuff that's built into Keynote. So they're not, there's 30 different ways of having something appear in Keynote, and it's just simply a drop down, and you can build pretty complex builds, inside of the program. I mean, it's definitely why a lot of us use Keynote for professional presentations until only a couple of years ago. Pretty much every company in the Fortune 10 used Keynote, whether they knew it or not. Behind stage, they would hand over their PowerPoints and their slide, Google Slides or whatever, and then someone would in the back end would fix them. They'd be like, "This is the best PowerPoint ever. This is the best Google Slides ever," and it was always because it was being converted into Keynote because it just runs better. And so then there were some people that found out, and then they got upset, and now their slide decks aren't as good. Anyway, go, Jason.
Yeah, for those who haven't played with Keynote, it really is one of the best production tools that there is. And there's a feature that if you haven't played with it recently is called Magic Move, which will basically just automatically do your interstitial animations.
Yeah.
And I've found that it's very useful to just keep stuff off of the slide and then just throw it in, throw it out, throw it in, throw it out, and all the animation will just adapt.
If you're not an animator and I mean, the next step up is motion, in my opinion, to do this kind of stuff. But if you're not ready to do that yet, you can do a lot in Keynote. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
If I had to pick one application to start my career over with, it would be Keynote.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Next question.
Comes from Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas, and he says the BBC's new Centre Square facility in Wales is the first completely IP BBC facility and has the world's largest SMPTE 2110 IP routing system for broadcast. This is clearly the future. How do we do a better job at adopting 2110?
Go ahead, John.
Learn networking and spend lots of money on routers and switches.
Yeah, I mean, it's a there's still a lot of glue that isn't there. That's what keeps people from jumping into it is, oh, you got to convert this to 2110 and that tool doesn't work, doesn't tie into 2110. And so those are the things that same thing with NDI. I mean, oh, you have to convert this, this signal over. But the clear future for most of these large facilities is 2110, and so that's and there's a lot of facilities right now over the last couple of years. There's no major facility that's being built currently that I know of that's not 2110. Go ahead, Bill.
I just wanted to note, because I've been doing this a good long time, and I started in the analog era and I watched the transition to digital, and this transition from digital into digital over IP was something that I wasn't quite ready for. And it really kind of hit me in the face one year. I was hired to do something at NAB, and literally everything that I had to do was video over IP. And all the years of knowledge of, take a BNC and connect it and decide whether the signal has made it successfully to the monitor went out the window, because these are computers and you connect that IT piece and it has to talk to the other device and it comes up maybe 30 or 45 seconds later. Those people who stick with old technology, I do worry about them, because it's moving so fast now that if you don't get yourself ready for the
takes
future.
Time. It takes time. I mean, I still think it's going to probably take another decade before we see everything that way. I mean, it takes time for these things to roll out, but the next 4 or 5 years, we should see a lot. But 2110 is what everything's going to sit on top of, and it will require, you won't have to buy routers anymore, but you will have to buy switches that you won't have to buy SDI routers, but you will have to buy switches that are nearly as expensive. So when you get down to it to manage all of that. Next question.
Doug Ferguson's up next from Fort Wayne, Indiana. He says, when you create a webinar in Zoom with registrations and the registration numbers go over your allotted attendee limit and you want to add more, will that need to be a new webinar, and will the current links change because of that?
Go ahead, Grant.
No, they actually do that dynamically. So if you pay for an extension, same in meetings and webinar, then it will work. So it's a good thing.
Go ahead, Guy.
You can add it.
Yeah, just make sure you apply it, because what'll happen is if you have an account with a lot of people on it, what'll happen is you'll purchase the license, then you got to assign the license. So in the back end, you got to say large meeting 500 or webinar 500 and turn it on with a checkbox for that person. Otherwise, it won't work. So you can pass licenses around. Like if one person has a webinar one week and another person, you can just hand it off.
And remember that you can always have more registrations than you have attendees. So you don't need to, it's how many people can come into the registration. So if you hit 550, especially on a free event, I wouldn't worry about it too much. We have in office hours, I think we have over 4,000 registrants. and we don't see more than a couple hundred on a given day inside of Zoom. Go ahead, Doug.
So what happens if that limit, let's say I don't do it, does it like hit 500 and then the next person doesn't get in? Is that how that works?
Yeah, if you're streaming to YouTube, so if you're streaming it to YouTube, it should divert them. That's why, so when it should divert them to the YouTube stream.
We're not streaming. This is strictly a webinar inside, but it's just, what happens? Does it just like say, nope, sorry, you can't get in?
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, it'll have a message if you're streaming it to the 501st person on a 500 webinar. It'll say you can watch it on this stream, and so they would click on that link. So they're presented with the URL on the back end. You actually put the URL in there. So if you know you're butting up against that, you might want to make an unlisted stream or something like that. If you don't,
just bump it up. But you can
Or just
definitely
bump it up. Yeah, but it's expensive. I mean, it's 500 to 1,000 is no joke. It gets to be spendy.
Yeah,
But if it's the client, I mean, you just could explain, hey, you want more people.
Yeah, if you have,
pony
that's a
up.
discussion to have with the client as to whether, and I think that they may be changing some of those structures. I've got a bunch of emails from them recently. So the limit may change, but I don't know if it has yet. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I've actually watched this a little bit with our meetings at 1,000. And occasionally we've had a malfunction with our load balancing, and so one will go up to 1,000, and I've seen it kind of go 1,003, 1,002. You know, but I know that people are getting an error message basically that comes up that just doesn't allow them in. But yeah, as soon as the interesting thing is when you have that amount of people, then you have a lot of people that are leaving as well, and so that number really fluctuates a lot.
Yeah.
And so, but yes, as soon as you add that, you add the increase, and as Guy said, apply it, then it works instantly. And actually, the same happens for you can turn off a license as well.
Will it work while the event's going on, or what? You need to do it before you start the. Oh, it will.
No, it does. It does, and we know this because you can actually turn a license off of a meeting as well, and the 40 minutes will start. And so we also do that. So we're playing around with that, where you can now grab that license back after the meeting has started, and use it on another meeting, and have that other meeting continue for another 40 minutes before it'll shut off. So some interesting things there. But yeah, it's all about how Zoom has different stacks of their servers, and some things are happening in real time and some things are not.
Right.
And that's how some of those settings that you cannot change and some you can change live.
Interesting. Next question.
Mike Beardmore of Reading in the UK is up next, and he says, when people join the Zoom webinar as an attendee, what is seen presented to the panel or producers? For example, can a raised hand be seen?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah, so we see a list of names of all of you, and you can raise your hand. We kind of ignore it after the mic checks. So if you raise your hand after we do mic, the only reason we use in this current webinar, the only thing that we use raised hands for is to enter and become a panelist before the mic checks begin, and then after that we don't really pay attention to them. So, but other people use them for other things. Like you can, for a webinar, that's how you can say, raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. You might ask a certain person to raise a hand. So there's a bunch of different ways to use that. Next question.
Peter Rosado in Las Vegas, Nevada says, without going in the rabbit hole, can Ken Jordan provide bullet points on his dislike of Squarespace?
Go ahead, Ken.
Platform's yours.
Yeah, my main thing with against Squarespace and Wix and platforms like that is if you're building a website for your business, for the front of house for your business, and you want it, every business is different. They all got separate needs and customizations, and building it on those platforms limits you. That's my very short version of something that I can talk about for days.
And I have to admit that until, I mean, the new office hours one Ken is building, so it's on WordPress. I've used Squarespace for a decade before Ken, but my opinion about it is, if you have someone or a group of people that are dedicated to developing your site for you, then it's great to have WordPress. If you are going to do it yourself, then Squarespace is great. Squarespace is great because it's just not. Like, there's too much clickety-click with WordPress. As a user, I'm just saying that I don't understand it. I don't, and I don't have any interest in it. And I've, successfully had a bunch of websites that are on Squarespace because I didn't care. All I cared about was you have to have a website, or someone has to have a place to go, or they don't know you exist, and you can turn it on and make that thing do the thing. We want to do more with it, so we know that we want it to scale and we want it to be better, and so that's why we're going to build it in WordPress for office hours, because it needs to scale. But as I just don't want to scare people off, because as a business, if you need to put a storefront out, the thing is that it's very inexpensive for you to throw something together that looks much better than you do on your own, unless you hire someone to do it. So go ahead, Ken. I'll let you rebut.
No, I agree to an extent. I mean, WordPress has become more bloated. to try to match Squarespace and Wix. So you can do it in those with some of those themes. But yes, I mean, you to get it right, then yes, hire a professional, and ideally not a graphic designer, even though I'm a trained graphic designer, but that was 30 odd years ago. Someone who understands business and understands what your business needs and how they can apply that to the website that you're building.
Yep, absolutely. I'm gonna go Jason and then Jeffrey.
Squarespace is fantastic based on the 90-90 principle. You know, what 90% of businesses need 90% of the time, Squarespace does beautifully. And again, in the same way, anytime you specialize, you know, of course there is better. But you know, getting hosting and content management directly from one company with a fixed price is what most businesses need.
Yeah, and running a webinar, you can do completely by yourself on Zoom. When you decide you want it to be like an event, then you start hiring people to do that. so to clean it all up, it's the same principle. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I do a lot of podcasts and streaming and videos and stuff like that. So Squarespace is when it started, it really didn't work too well with podcasts, but it's kind of grown on that. My suggestion is always to have, when you're starting the website, have a migration plan in mind. So if you do grow out of scale that you need to move over to something else, at least you have an idea of where to go and what to do at that point.
Yeah, good, Charles.
I just wanted to add the point. When New York City had the blackout, I remember Squarespace was carrying oil and gas up to the offices.
They're generators, yeah,
to run the office. And I'm a fan of investing in people, so they have my vote.
Yeah. Good, Chris.
You know, there's a bigger picture here that we've kind of touched around and skirted. There comes a point in a business where you graduate from I'm going to take care of this to I'm going to hire people to take care of it. And when you're at the I'm going to take care of this, there's always the fear that you will take on a task or a responsibility or a process that if something were to go wrong, you can't fix it. So a lot of times, to Alex, to borrow one of your terms, we'll keep our elbows in because it's like, I don't want to get bigger than this because I can handle it. When you graduate to the point where it's like, I will hire the people to do it, it's very freeing, and it allows you to say, like I don't understand Squarespace or the other one. What's the one we're talking about?
WordPress.
Yeah, WordPress. I mean, I made a WordPress site once, and it's horrible. But when you free yourself to the point where I'm going to hire people to do it, it's very liberating. It's just that you now have an infrastructure that you have to support, kind of getting back to that whole, like, I got to make payroll thing.
Yep. Go ahead, Ken, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just to me, if it's no more than a business card, then fine. But it's the front-facing page of your business. It's what people would interact with you first, unless you can talk to everyone one-to-one. So not investing in that seems very strange to me. If this is the thing that all the world is seeing first of your business, unless you don't really care that much about the business, then I'm sure Squarespace is fine.
There's the backhand. All right, next question.
Tim Holm in San Lorenzo is up next here on the panel. And he says, if and when Mukana becomes more widely available, has there been a discussed monthly price range for end users?
Not yet. Yeah, we're still working on that. I mean, we build it up custom for everyone right now. The goal is to make it much more much self-run and much more much less expensive. So bordering on, for smaller events, bordering on free. But we're still working on the infrastructure to make that work. Next question.
Mark Giuliani here also from Alexandria, Virginia this time says, if one wants to bring several people into a Zoom presentation and then an ATEM, what device is recommended to get audio from the computers into an X-Air 18, a Moto M2, a MixPre 3, or something similar?
Go ahead, Carl.
As far as I'm aware, Zoom doesn't have ISO audio. I'll let you speak more to that.
Yeah, you need separate computers for each person to get the ISO in and out. So, that's and then at that point for an XR18, you're going to need, it doesn't have Dante. So you'll need to do convert the I/O for each of those computers to some kind of analog input. So that could be a variety of different devices for that type of thing. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, you can do a little bit. I tested using Dante Via, which generally people across the board here have said is not reliable, which I was certainly my experience when I didn't have a Dante native device on the network. But I haven't gone back and tested now, because the thing that I did with Via is that you could bring all 18 channels, 18 by 18 of the XR18 into Via, which then makes all of those Dante compatible. So now you've got all 18 channels, and now you could route those, and so you could actually make those computers with Dante and feed them through. It's a bit of a wacky way of doing it. The other thing to remember is that you could do a local recording of those Zoom machines, and those recordings have ISO audio in them. You can flick that switch on. So then you would have ISO recording, at least for post-production.
Yeah, and I wouldn't, from my experience so far, I wouldn't put Dante Via into a live environment. so like it's wonky. I love Dante. Dante Via is has been a little scary for us. I mean, we've experimented with it over the years, and it's just every time we go into it, something happens. I've never, literally 100% of the time, something happens that we didn't want it to do. So that's why we don't. But we use Dante for everything else. It's the audio that's the tricky part. If you're willing to have the audio be all merged together and you're not worried about that, then the video part is relatively easy to get into the ATEM, just converting the output from the computer into the switcher. Next question.
Robert Klein is up next from Waddell, Arizona, and he says, Alex, I only can afford to buy once. What's the current kit that you send out just for office hours?
Currently, we don't send anything out for office hours, but for 090, we have a couple kits that we send out. We used to send out one that was a pile with a Brio and the Nanlite 68Bs with a auto earpiece. Since then, we've upgraded those. So the minimum that we send out now is a Mac Mini with a Brio, Mix Pre 3 with a Countryman, and a Audio Implements earpiece. And then what we are using for size reasons, we moved to the 6Cs, the Panotube 6Cs that Chris got us hooked on. And we send out 2 to 4 of those, for both foreground and background. But they're not nice and tiny. The problem with them really is that you want to have them horizontal, not vertical, to where you put them so they don't reflect. And I'm still working on designing something that makes them bigger. The problem is they're really powerful, but we need to diffuse them, build a big kind of semicircle around them. That we haven't gotten around to yet. So that's the thing that we want to try to find something we can fold open and then attach to the quarter 20s on top and bottom to make that work. Tripods for everything, some version of a tripod. I tend to pack my own. ProMaster makes a light stand that has LSCT in it. Those are the combination. I can never remember what combination of the letters that it is, because I don't know what it means. But I use those. We send those out because they're very flexible. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So I have 2 kits that I send out. One is just basically an Intel NUC with a C920 and whatever earpiece. And I think I have the Pulson in them right now. But then I also have one that isn't for Zoom. It's actually for simple recording, and that's an Android-based phone in a cage that goes right on a tripod. And everything is there, so you just basically pull it out of the case, set it on the tripod, plug in a couple things, and then you're ready to go. Until they can actually do Zoom on those, I won't, because Zoom is just horrible on an Android or iPhone. But I can record 8K and then bring it up in for post-recording. That's a lot of the stuff I do there, too.
That's great. Next question.
JHB in New York is in with Charles. Seems to have great skin tone and detail in his beard. What is his video chain? Charles, you're on.
Hey, Jay. So what I'm using is actually a Pocket 6K. So right now, it's about $2,000. For what you get for the camera, it's amazing, right? Now, the lens that I chose to use, because I was doing production from home and I was doing a lot of beauty products, I needed to go with something very sharp, but that wouldn't break the budget exactly. So I chose the Milvis 50. Now, I chose this because it's actually weather sealed. And at the time we were going outside a little bit. So, you tend to invest the most in your lenses because the bodies you go through over time. But this lens I bought and I sent to Duclos Lenses out in the West Coast, and they they did a cinemod on it, and that turned it into something that I could actually have a focus assist working with me on set or wherever I was. And this is essentially the rig that I concocted for home use. This is what I was using to carry around, and I dismantled most of it, and essentially is mostly just the 6K and the Milvis right now that you are seeing. And for the color, I actually have the camera set to video, and I'm doing a lot of the adjusting to what my eye prefers with the Bluetooth app. So that's been where I find my little balance every so often. If I change a camera, or if I like a light or something, I want to get a shift, I do it there. It's been the most efficient. I know that a lot of people here do it in the ATEM software, but I just found, like, for me, I'm used to doing it that way because I set up the camera before I put it in a place that I can't really get to, which is back there. So I tend to do everything on the camera, but that's essentially it.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
That cinemod on the lens, is that just the gear that was added to it, or is some other internal changes on the lens?
Some internal changes. So if you can see here, so this is actually the Nikon one, because there is a difference it's a small difference in the build between the Canon and the Nikon one. And then Duclos has the ability to go in and set it so that now it's a full cine lens where you could actually manually control aperture and focus with the rings that you attach to it. You can't do that with the Canon one. I didn't know that beforehand. I called Duclos and they explained everything to me. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. Now at that time, it actually added a few $100s to the cost, but for the things that I was doing at the time, I needed a pretty sharp lens. Past this, I would probably go with the Otis, which used to be around $4,000. I think during the pandemic, it's come down a little bit, but for sharpness is what I needed for me. I didn't need the lens to give me a flavor. I just needed to give me what I'm looking at as sharp as possible, so then I could process myself.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I remember when that Otis first came out, the ad was at the photo convention was the medium format look from a 35 millimeter, and it really was. I mean, they had some printed samples, but I wanted to just point out that the beautiful thing about Charles's image is the lighting. I mean, if I was sitting next to him, I would actually say to him, Charles, your lighting looks great, because visibly when you're sitting there in real life with somebody, you can see it. And the thing about these sensors is once you're optimized with the right exposure, they really shine. If you take something that's ISO 1600 and it's just muddy, I mean, you wonder why. It's when you get these cameras properly exposed, they really, really become super sharp. So don't forget about your lighting.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Plus one on what Guy said. Charles, if you can cut to that again, I want to point out just how large that light source is on his rig. He's also a professional and gifted colorist. So just a reminder, like you need to recognize that there's a great deal of professional expertise that goes into making all of this look easy.
Go ahead, Charles.
And to add what everybody just said, the basic rule is if you're going to be focused on skin tone, then everything else needs to sit hopefully on the opposite side of the color wheel, which would help your brain focus on the person. It's just something that we've done in films for the longest time, which is why a lot of films you have that blue teal look, orange teal look, where you have the orange for the highlights and then the teal for the background, darker colors, and it separates everything. But the most important thing, as Guy was mentioning, is lighting and contrast. You get that right, and then you get the color right with the separation, and you're off to the races.
Next question.
comes from Tulak Miguel Lopez Waterman, who has been here on the panel before. I have been appalled lately by network television video quality with remote contributions. They've all gone down. How can they get away with it?
You know, they for the most part, they think of that kind of contribution as disposable. You know, they're like, well, you can't make that look that way. You can't make it look like broadcast. And I also don't think that they want it to look like broadcast. I think that there's a kind of an in the studio and out of the studio look. If they started getting the kind of quality that we have coming into it, you'd have producers asking why they're spending so much money on cameras and things and people. And, you know, so there's a whole lot of, there's two things there. One is again, the other thing to remember is that they don't have people who are working on their kit every day. They're sending something out. That person has to get whatever they have available to them. They're not sending, heavy kits out. When we first started doing this 10 years ago, there were big kits that people would send out that would, Oprah and other people would send out these kits that were these Skype, boxes and they were, $10,000 each, and they would just send them out with an operator. And so that did happen in the past. And then, now that they're using it so much, they don't do that anymore. And again, I think that they just keep on waiting for it to go back to normal, when they can send out the stuff that they need. The problem that they have is that, I mean, again, it's one of the reasons that we're pushing so hard on quality and why our show is going to keep pushing over the summer into a higher quality. It's to call them to the mat. To be honest with you, it's just like, my plan is to really create a show by this fall that you can just point to, that we can all point to when we're talking to people of like, well, they seem to figure it out, and it's going to create, ripples, I think, for people, because they're not going to be able to keep on saying you can't do this over Zoom. Go ahead, George.
So I can assure all of you that many folks in the AV industry, when office hours started, a lot of my colleagues were coming in the back end of office hours watching it to see what we're doing. I just don't understand why WebEx is still a choice for bringing in remotes. Every Sunday, it just falls apart completely every time WebEx comes in. Zoom is like, I don't understand. Is there a rule against networks using Zoom?
Well, remember that if Zoom if you don't have the account, if they haven't gone through, and what I find is most people don't even know that there's a 1080p account that's available. So if they don't have that 1080p account and they don't know that it's available and they don't have the trick for the 720p and they haven't done the research, then they're going to get a 360p image and they're going to be like, well, I can't use that on TV. The baseline for Blue Jeans and WebEx and even Skype is higher than Zoom. So when you just turn them on, the resolution is higher. It's not until you make the requests or have a Zoom room or other things like that. So it's just, if you're turning it on and you're not paying much attention to it, and you're like, oh, well, we have to connect somehow, and you're not spending a week doing research, or you don't know about office hours, you're not going to know that you can have a higher resolution. So that's the thing that they won't know. And so Zoom will look very low resolution to them. Go ahead, Charles.
And also remember the generations. Like, for example, most of us have cut the cable. We don't exactly have cable at home, right? So the generation that is mostly watching TV networks is the older generations, but everybody coming up now is getting used to the standard set by a lot of the YouTubers and TikToks and what we're doing here, where we are as pro as we can get, short of spending $60,000 on an Alexa Mini, right? So that generation is slowly going to go away, and this is now the new standard, for the generation that is coming up. This is the new standard. So it's
And the thing is that Twit has been doing this for a decade. Where they've had with consumer cameras, but when you look at it under a controlled environment, it looks like a broadcast at that point. And so it has been it's been doable for a long time. It's just that most people haven't had to deal with that, and most people again don't want to. They just want to go back to what they were doing before. Unfortunately for broadcast, that's probably not going to happen. They're on a slowly sinking ship, so they they don't have the money to invest in this, and this system doesn't really this getting better is not necessarily good for them either, because it's just going to mean that all of us can do what they were doing. Go ahead, Bill.
The other thing I think that people don't consider is that TV had a business model that has been going for generations, good or bad, the advertising-driven model that relies on a thing called cost per thousand of delivered audience to a business to determine the rates. that's all blown away now. And you know, how much of an audience do you have to make money on YouTube? Well, the people who make really good money have millions and millions of attached viewers who come back for their content. That is a huge shift in the dynamics of metrics for what it means to make money in a process. And I don't think anybody has still figured out what the new thing is going to be. I mean, how many people do you need to provide to an advertiser, or do you go advertiser free and keep your content free of that influence?
We're moving away from the advertising model. I mean, you know, like this, and it's just that that's the reality is that it's just going to slowly wind out because people don't want to for the advertising. What happened was advertisers had no information. Then they had a lot of information. Then they took advantage of all that information. You know, okay, now we can connect it all. And so a bunch of smart pencil necks, you know, like figured out like we can tie all this stuff together, and then we can track you when you buy stuff at Safeway, and then we can track you when we do this, and we can track your phone, and then we can connect all those together, and then we can you know customize all those ads, and they put all that stuff together, and it seemed like a good idea. But anytime you increase the gain on a manipulation, eventually it breaks. You know, like so people say, okay, I can take this and then I'm just going to wash it over and over again. When you start doing sequel after sequel after sequel after sequel, because that's a model that makes sense, and you keep on going back to that well rather than building an entire ecosystem that makes sense. You know, so what happened is that they've leveraged all this stuff to a point where now we're not, you know, people are pulling back, and now everyone's buying subscriptions and not watching any of those things. You know, I don't watch. I mean, I watch a handful of TV shows from Sunday morning typically, and maybe one or two other ones, and I skip all the ads. I just scoot over all the ads, and I don't even watch the whole show. Like I watch like things like I was watching last night. I was watching George Stephanopoulos or whatever this week with George Stephanopoulos, except there's no George Stephanopoulos with somebody else. But I just want to watch the roundtables. I don't care about any interviews. So you sit there and just scan through it. But for most of us, I mean, I think that we just watch the parts that we want now. And I think that that's going to be really hard for content, narrative content. There's still a market. There's subscriptions for broadcast, like the standard broadcast, The View and the news and those things. It's kind of, you know, no man's land, you know, to you know, in that world for them. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, CPM as taught by business schools when I was going through college was a metric designed for stories with holes, for not understanding the way that the way that people consumed things, or not being able to get any feedback. And to that end, not only is it broken today, it's more it's like heat index when the dew point is wrong. Like it just breaks the metric.
Mm-hmm. Next question.
Moving on, Peter Rosado of Las Vegas, Nevada says, trying out the Neewer X1 teleprompter to have a better eyeline. What is the best way to have an iPhone, iPad screen flipped so that it looks straight?
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's really hard to do, and I bought a small one of those and threw it away. So beware of really small teleprompts that are really hard to read from any distance. The larger iPad ones are actually much more usable.
Go ahead, Bill.
I will just say there are apps that do this. They're inexpensive. I think I paid $9.95 for one called Teleprompt Plus, and it works with your iPhone, and it does reverse and flip and teleprompting.
But I think that the goal here, according to his, is to have a better eyeline, which I don't know whether that's. I think what he's doing, and Peter might be able to, but I think what he's talking about is putting zoom on it. You know, on the iPad, not text. And so what I don't know is how you flip an iPad view that's coming in that you're using to do it. I don't think this is a teleprompt flip. I think this is, and Peter may be able to write another question and correct me, but I think that he's talking about being able to flip, because that's the problem. That all the teleprompt software that you get will flip the text, but how do you flip the screen? And I think that the way you would do that is to get it the way you want it, you know, upside down or whatever, then lock the screen and then pull it back in and put it back into place. I think that might do, it'd still be reversed, but it won't be upside down. Go ahead, George.
So if you could squeeze it into your budget, Lilliput has this 10-inch monitor that works. That's what I'm using right now for my teleprompter. My screen is only about 10 inches. So the Lilliput 10-inch will drop right in, and it's got all the flip functions. It's got SDI and HDMI in, and both pass through. So that's what a lot of us are using for prompting right now.
And I've never used an iPad for a teleprompter, only because difficult to work with. You know, I just want a monitor that I can control. Go ahead, Jason.
And if you want to go full crazy, right now to correct my eyeline, I'm using the Prompter People 24-inch, and oh boy, is it beautiful.
There you go. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, up next. And Rupert says, for ceiling grid arrangements, when does a truss-based system become appropriate over a pipe-based system like speed rail? Is this just for strength, or are there other practical differences?
Go ahead, Jesse.
So I'll speak on the strength part, where it would just be based on the weight and the span. I'm sure Alex has a lot of advice regarding what gear works better with what type of a truss system.
Go ahead, Carl.
So I've looked into this myself, and I think truss-based systems suit someone like me who's a photographer, who's not working. So if you're in the video world, then a pipe-based system is best. And I think a photographer who can have stuff on stands and up there in the truss, and a background that you can slide in and out, those kind of things, a little bit better for me. So, but for video systems, I think pipe is better.
Go ahead, Bill.
And I, for many years in my studio before I shut it down, had what's called an IFF Studio rail system. The magic of that was that each of the cross members had 2 main rails down my studio and then 3 crossbars. Each crossbar was on what they called trucks, which are little wheeled arrangements. And then the lights mounted to also trucks, so that you literally could take any light and put it on a pantograph, which is one of those things like the old cartoon boxing gloves. And you could take a light and position it in every possible axis. You could move it over, you could move it forward, you could move it up or down, and position a light wherever it needed to be correct for that person you were lighting or that object you were lighting. They're not inexpensive. I think I spent probably $5,000 or $6,000 on it 7 to 10 years ago. But boy, when I was using it in my studio, it was the biggest time saver I could possibly imagine. Never had to get a ladder out, and you could just take any light and put it anywhere you wanted, or camera for that matter.
Go ahead, Jesse.
So I'm reminded of Alex's story about when at the White House, you put everything on the truss and then you tilted it up.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another factor. If you plan to build it on the ground and tilt it up, a truss will resist the forces as you're raising it much better than just a pipe.
Yeah, I mean, so where we go back and forth with it is freestanding or not freestanding. So truss is something that if we're going to do a freestanding system, we're going to have a truss. If we're going to do now we may have a mixture of that, a truss with some railing that's being supported by that truss, but the truss is going to have its own rigidness. So almost everything that we've done in the past that is like at a conference center, or again, as you said, like building something in the East Room or building something in a convention center, all of those things are things we do with truss. When we're doing something in a studio, I mean, very large studios, I've never seen, like, people who work in like sound stages I don't think they really interact with truss at all. Like it's all speed rail, and so, and those are usually hanging from the ceiling, or they can be put up. Like I've had, the largest one I think I've had is probably 20 by 20 in a room with freestanding speed rail going straight up. But to stabilize it, what we did is you get these little pieces and you can push it into the wall on all 4 sides. So it goes up in the corners, and then you push it into the walls and it stabilizes it to it, so that you don't have to hang it from the ceiling. So if you're doing it in your own space, I would use railing. The railing can hold a lot of weight, generally more than that. It's not that, and I built generally 2 by 2 or 3 by 3 foot grids. Is just kind of how we kind of approach it. Yep, next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas says, any comments or recommendations for quarter 20 quick connect adapters for moving small to medium accessories quickly from rig to rig?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, so Matthews and Manfrotto make something like this. This is a super clamp. So essentially on the bottom here, you can see that it's 1/4 inch. It has a pin acceptor as well. So in the pin, you can put a baby adapter. You can put a 3/8 and a 1/4 20 as well. You'd find a whole bag of these on every film set. So they're a dime a dozen pretty much.
The one that I've been really looking for is trying to find ones that you can just pop in. They'll snap into location. And I've been looking for quick releases that I haven't found one that I'm happy with yet. To basically drop cameras onto a tripod with a quick release. I mean, other than the old, V mounts and so on and so forth that you can just kind of drop in. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, +1 on the super clamps, and yeah, with the exception of the additional, what are they, Manfrotto, that just straight slide in, slide out. And I've never seen a quick top-down release that I've been happy with.
Yeah, I can't find one that does quite what I want it to do. That it just locks into place and you just set it down. I've got a couple of them. I was looking for one I was going to show that one of the things I'm also looking for is one that has a little bit of a ball joint to it so that I can do a little bit of steerage, when I snap it in. And this is for actually the kits that we send out. We need right now sliding the teleprompter in the bigger kit that we have a teleprompter, and sliding that onto the tripod as a little thing. So we just wanted to set it so you just kind of pop it in, and we just haven't found the right solution yet. Go ahead, Bill.
You might want to look at this thing, and I'm going to mess my microphone up, and I'm sorry for the audio quality, but you can see in here there's an Audio Technica piece that if I pull back the little collet, it will pop in and pop out. It does kind of what you're talking about. The only downside to this is it has some sharp edges, and I whack my fingers occasionally when I'm moving the mic from the voice booth back to here, but that's a solution.
Go ahead, Jason.
Just one last thought on that for you, Alex. I have a Z plate, depending upon the weight of the camera, a Z plate that'll go up and down that fixes a lot of those issues, but it's only for light cameras.
Yeah. Next question.
Moving on, Philip Oler in Katona, New York says recommendations for 4K cameras for on-camera talent during local tennis tournament live streams. Needs HDMI out and 3.5 millimeter audio in. Budget is $300 to $500 with lens. Prefer a DSLR rather than a camcorder style.
Go ahead, Jason.
Sony's FDR AX53, if you buy it used, will absolutely meet all of those qualifications.
Go ahead, Carl.
If it's for a tennis tournament, I'd be going for something like this. So C-mount lens where you can change the lens. It has 4K, HDMI out, it has 3.5 audio in. It's in the price range you're looking at. The reason why I would go with this over something with a fixed lens that has photography is this can fit in many housings. So there's a lot of housings.
I think that if you're shooting the tennis match, that might make sense. I think this is for the talent. So it's so I think I'd be tempted more towards that one will be just a little bit, it feels like it'll be a little fiddly. I don't know, C-mount. I've not had a lot of experience. Have you used the C-mounts very much? Have you used C-mount?
Yeah, so I have. There are some pretty crazy C-mount lenses made by Marshall. But this is more for the tennis itself, like on-court, side of court, that kind of stuff.
If you're trying to hide it somewhere I think that I took this as all I saw was talent. So I just said, well, that's going to be them with a short depth of field behind them. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, one that somebody in Mukana a couple months ago recommended was this Lumix G100, or they actually just had a question about it, so I went ahead and got it. And it does have the 3.5 millimeter mic input. It is interchangeable lenses, so there is a Sony model that's similar to this that doesn't have the interchangeable lenses. So what I did was I took the lens off. That's not so great. It's a 12 to 32, which it's a micro four thirds, so that's a 24 to 64 in 35 millimeters. So I upgraded to the Olympus 12 to 40, which is super sharp. So that, get this camera for $599, so it's a little over your budget, but it's worth it to get the proper HDMI out that's clean. So
and is that
I use this camera in office hours for months.
Out?
It
will do 4K.
I've only used it for HD out. I don't know. Actually, saying 4K camera. I'm not sure if
I realize I don't even think the 5300 will do that either.
So they're all HD out. Yeah. So everything that we've been, that's why the one I was trying to. Well, you're right. I was looking at more tennis rather than talent. But 4K output, that's a little bit harder.
Yeah. That's I don't know what would do that other than maybe I think does the GoPro do 4K out? It's not a great talent camera, but I think it does 4K out of it. So I think that you could get that. That's about the only thing I know of in that price range that would have a 4K out. Next question.
Matt Wood, Newcastle upon Tyne. Is it just me, or does every conversation about digital events outside of office hours just feel painfully prehistoric?
Well, we started talking about it a lot earlier than everyone else. So I think that part of it is, and there's a bunch of people here who have been doing a lot of them, and for me, I've been doing them for a decade. So there's a lot of things that a lot of the concepts that I hear people talk about that sometimes I push back on relatively strenuously. It's stuff that I thought was a good idea like 10 years ago. In the first 200 events that I did, I had a whole bunch of concepts about what would work and what wouldn't work. And I just ran them, with lots of budget, ran them to their, their end state. And so I'm just kind of like, okay, well, that's a dead end. I'm letting you know ahead of time that, after a couple hundred events, that didn't really work. But people seem committed. Bill?
I think there's a tension that's natural between moving ahead and staying relevant with what's happening right now. And I see that a lot with the gear that I bought and owned over the course of the years. You don't want to be behind when the industry is changing rapidly, but if you get too far over your skis, you do crash. So it's that push and pull constantly. When do I make the leap into a new set of technologies that can get me farther faster, but not leave my old clients behind so that I can't make money for a period of time and I maybe crash and burn the whole operation?
And we have to remember that a lot of people have failed. A lot of people have failed over the last year trying to do digital events. So part of it is they knew what they knew, and whether it was very effective or not didn't matter. It was what everyone accepted as the norm. This is just how an event works. It may be boring, maybe not very exciting, but it's, we know that we'll do this the same next year and we'll make a better, whatever. Everything's incremental at that point. And suddenly they were thrown into this place where they didn't understand it. And again, I worked on lots of events where the client, in that case, Google, the first, 500 events was a client that would just be experimenting. If it didn't work, they were like, oh, that was a good experiment. Let's not do that again. And so that was, or let's take some of that. And that was a very unique position to be in, to be able to play with ideas without them having to work. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, Blue and I were just talking about this just before, and particularly it shows up in hybrid events, because we really see that the two extremes there. And we're talking about the kiddie table. The kiddie table at a Thanksgiving dinner was a perfect example, because on this particular event we were talking about, this hybrid event, about 100 people in person and 700 people online. And the MC comes out and says, it's great to be in person.
Right.
And it's just like the worst thing to say, right? Because those 100 people, and it's the equivalent of saying, here's all the adults at the table, you're all happy, and, oh, kids, are you okay back there? Do you need a bit more stuffing? Okay, cool. And then back to the, and anyway, my point is that what happened with that event is that they have seen, at the end of it, the client really has seen the light. And at least acknowledges that either doing it in person or digital first, is the way to go. But I have found that in conversations with people now, that it's not until they experience it a little bit, experience some of the good and experience some of the bad, that then we can slowly move forward. And so I'm constantly biting my tongue, but it's, it's
I'm too old to bite my tongue anymore. So I just kind of like, we can do whatever you want. It's your nickel. Like that's usually like, but it usually comes down to, I just keep on reminding them that the in-person is like a Ferrari because it's fast and responsive, and the online is like a speedboat because you can go anywhere and you're all over the place. And the hybrid is like an amphibious unit. It works in both places, kind of. So it's, and that usually that's become very useful for our clients to visualize what they're getting. And what happens is you give them these things, the kiddie table, the hybrid, the amphibious unit and everything else. You don't change what they're going to do. You do it exactly the way you want to do it, but you have those in the early conversations of your opinions about how that's going to turn out. That poisons the well, and that poison is slow acting. Sometimes it takes a couple of events. There you go, Fenwick. Sometimes it takes a couple of events, but you have to lay the seed for them to see it, to see what's going on, and they go, oh right, and they just can't they won't be able to get over the kiddie table, and they won't be able to get over the amphibious unit after 3 or 4 of them because they don't really work. And I will do, if someone hires us to do a hybrid event, they still do. I do everything. I know exactly how to do a hybrid event really well. Like I know how to tie people in and make sure that the audio is perfect and the video is perfect. I can execute what they want probably as well as anyone else in the world. I know that it's not nearly as effective for the online audience and it's really expensive, but that's, just a bigger project for me. I would prefer to charge my clients less and have them be more successful, and so that's usually what I just make sure that they know that there's a better way to do this, but I'm happy to do it any way they want. Go ahead, Leland.
One thing we've noticed over the years when working with clients on virtual events is, and we'll touch on the painfully prehistoric part, I think here, is that there are a lot of people that aren't AV savvy as we are here as a team. Obviously, we all have been in this industry for years upon years. So when you talk to someone who's never been in anything but a live event, what you're dealing with is someone who's very comfortable with where they've been, how to get there, where to go, how to follow the paces to go through that event. Now we've got all this technical jargon that's coming into play, a lot of new equipment. You got to have hardware, you got to have software, you got to have this and that blows people away. They're kind of like, how am I supposed to learn all this and get all this? I'm not tech savvy, I'm not this or that, I'm not a computer expert. So we have to kind of step back a little bit now and then and realize that these people aren't at the level we are in audio and video, and we need to kind of hold their hand a little bit as we move along. So the more we teach them, the better.
And, you know, I think we also have to remind people that the physical events weren't that good before either. The only reason people showed up is because there was food. You know, like let's be clear that, like, you know, food and hanging out with people was the thing that drew people in. It's an afternoon off. I'm going to get some good food and some coffee. I'm going to hang out with a couple people and go home. And I'm going to mostly spend most of my time sitting there on my phone, answering emails and tweeting and talking, you know, and texting and so on and so forth, and not really pay attention, because who wants to watch those stupid slides? So the thing is that the reality is that the physical events were not that good in the first place. And I think it's just that people can step away really fast online, where once you were in the room, you were kind of stuck. You know, like it would look bad when you stood up and walked out. Nowadays, you can just do that anytime you want. And so that's the difference, is people are moving with their feet a lot faster because there's no social stigma to it. Go ahead, Chris.
You've talked a lot about when they start doing the numbers, it'll become painfully obvious. There have been multiple times in my career, as I used to travel and do happy face videos, that I would argue with the people saying, like, look, you spend more on cookies and coffee in between sessions at those exorbitant prices at convention centers than my video costs.
Right.
Really? You want to cut me? Cut some cookies. I'm cheap.
Yeah. But then they wouldn't come without the cookies, because that's the only reason to go to a physical event. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I just was talking with my wife, the teacher, and she's talking about the students that same attitude of swipe, and that they don't even show up, or that it's been a year now. And so we have an entire generation of potential students that have missed a year of connection, of learning. And so to your point of, we're now training the next generation how to just swipe left and not show up.
Well, I mean, I think that it's our job this is why I get into, I talk about average view time. Like people say, oh, we had 300,000 people watch this show. And I'm like, okay, what was the average view time? 11 seconds? 12 seconds? That's, and so the thing is that when we start measuring, when we start actually paying attention to the tangible numbers that make a difference, we start changing the way, it's just math, and if you're not getting, a reasonable amount of time, average view time, you can fix everything else. But if people aren't paying attention to what you're doing, then you know that your content isn't working. Our average, again, I have done thousands of events, and I can tell you that Facebook is about 28 seconds of a show, for most events. I mean, if anyone who looks at that average view time, you get about 28 seconds. YouTube is about 6.5 minutes, so that's considerably better than Facebook, but, because it's not in a feed, and office hours is 82 minutes, and so, like when you start changing, like it's not like a little more, it's a lot more. And so what we're, and that's what people have to figure out, is we need to stop wasting their time by delivering content in real time. Like that is just a horrible use of people's time. It's all of our time. You're just burning it up. Like you just literally just create a dumpster, fill it with fireable things, put fire in it, dumpster fire. You should not be doing that. You should not be presenting material in real time. That is wasting everybody's time. What we're here for, and that's why what we do here is we talk about things, because then we have all these people collected together to think about things in real time. And that's the value. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah. Perfect example of what you're talking about was we just had an event recently where we managed to convince them to make their content available before the event, and then to turn what was going to be an hour session into just an hour of discussion. And the quote after the event was, "I couldn't believe they spoke for the whole hour. They had questions for the whole hour." It was like, yeah, and they would have gone for 5 hours if you let them.
That's
the
thing.
It's like, but they were like, we normally have 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah.
But we had an hour, and luckily they had this is what they said. Luckily, the moderator had a couple of questions of their own just in case. I was like, people of any interest area will happily sit around for hours and hours and just talk about it if you give them the opportunity. And if we're not limited we're not limited by time or space, then just let it happen, and it'll be amazing to see what happens.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I think in smaller, a lot of you guys work with really big companies that have track records, and they've charted their numbers over the years, not just during the pandemic, but I think in these, I've interacted with smaller organizations or individuals or independent groups, and I think what they don't realize, and I don't want to be mean, but they just think that their content's more interesting than it actually is, and they think that, but in a way,
everybody
that they,
thinks that.
but
the
in a
rule of
way
life
that they
is
think that they're.
Everybody thinks that they're more
Sure.
that they're more interesting than
they don't even have
are.
numbers to prove or disprove that. And
Right.
I think, I've seen it in every screenwriting class I've been in, playwriting class, everything where they think that their thing is the next magic, and they think that their stuff is interesting enough to supersede what video and audio quality will provide.
Right.
And that just won't. And it's a tough conversation to have with these smaller individual groups, where I don't want to dissuade them from doing their thing, but
Right.
convincing them how important it is to up
and again,
that
like
delivery.
when we talk about why, we're going to keep on doing bigger and bigger events, and our show is going to keep on, the idea is to inspire people to think, oh, wow, this might be worth actually investing a little bit into what we're doing. Go ahead, Guy.
And I think it's up to the host to make it okay to ask questions.
Oh, yeah.
When I used to do events a lot, I would get there early. I would learn some of the attendees' names and what they did, and then I would rope that into part of the presentation. I'd be like, and Bill, he does editing, and in this case, he would use Final Cut to, do a ripple edit like this. And now people started to relate, and there was connection. And so at the end, people wanted to ask questions because they felt that it was okay. If you make it not okay, if you're like the Sony guy at the NAB event that has a phone hack in his ear, and he's like a robot talking, you can't ask that guy a question. He doesn't know anything. He's getting, fed IFB through the back room.
And again, if you're gonna tie it together, my whole thing is, as soon as you turn a teleprompter on for a presentation, you should have recorded it. Just record. If you're gonna do it, if you're gonna have a human being be a robot and read the thing, just make it a video and give it to people rather than trying to say it in front of them. It doesn't make any sense. And I get up. Anybody who's been in any of my NAB talks or anything else, I get up and the first thing I say is, "Hey, I'm not that good at just talking. I'm really good at conversing. I'm not very good at talking. So if you don't raise your hand, this is going to be a real short trip." You'll have other time to go to somebody else's thing. But if you ask questions, we'll have a good day. And that kind of sets that up. And I start taking questions almost immediately. One of the things that you'll notice when you're watching, we can watch people asking questions. Every time you answer a question, you'll see this, this is the frequency of questions. So when people see the positive reinforcement of someone asking the question, now with ours, it's constant, it's a constant reinforcement. But for other people, every time they pick up their, and then there's certain things like don't pick up a card, always use an iPad or some kind of tablet device so that they see that it's reactive. If it's a card, they'll immediately realize that the questions are canned, and so those are the kind of things that you want to kind of think through. Next question.
Comes from Alex Smith in Raleigh, North Carolina. vMix crashes multiple times on my main and backup PC between 1 and 15 minutes into things. My setup is 4 sources over NDI, Zoom, streaming to Vimeo. All equipment is maintained. Total usage is plus or minus 20%. Thursday, Friday, 8-hour show with 0, no issues. Thoughts? NDI issues? What's going on?
All right, go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Leland.
So it might not. Oh, it could be an NDI issue, but more to the point, it might be more of the network issue. The big thing is you're putting it on 2 different machines and having the same thing happen. I would check the logs. vMix has a really good log system in their vMix folder, and that'll tell you more information on there. But the other thing is with software switchers, always have I always have at least 3 previous versions of the same software ready so I can reload it, so I can go back to when it actually worked the best. And then I go from there. And then, of course, reloading vMix onto the computer is always an option as well.
Go ahead, Leland.
Yeah, and Jeff's on the right path. And actually, they just released a .61 update 8 hours ago because they were having issues with an input frame delay that was causing the inputs to stop or actually corrupt memory. So you could have a version that is unstable.
First thing I do if something suddenly becomes unstable, I will admit, especially if I'm using something like vMix or any of these, those are dedicated computers that only do that one thing. And if they only do that one thing, I grind them to the ground. Like I just literally reinstall the whole system and then put everything back in from, downloading pieces and nothing from the old piece to see if that's going to fix it. It's harder to do when you have the computer doing a bunch of things. But if you're doing video production as a job, your computer should do the thing. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I would highly recommend getting the live streaming element off of the machine. And these the Blackmagic web presenters are amazing. That streaming works really great in those, and of course that ATEMs have them in as well. And the other thing I'd just double check is you're thinking about multicast versus unicast with NDI, because you're actually pushing a lot of traffic. You're doing eight across, and if it's in unicast, and that's actually 8 streams. And so have a look at that. You could be maxing out the network.
Next question.
Tim Holmes in San Lorenzo wants to talk about music stuff and shooting it. Can we discuss Marshall Electronics CV503 Mini HD camera versus the Huddlecam HD versus GoPro for a perspective third shot camera for drums or keyboards or overhead shots and so forth?
Go ahead, Carl.
So if price wasn't a concern, it would be the Blackmagic Studio 4K Mini. That's a really good camera to
or micro, the micro, or are you talking about the micro?
The micro, sorry.
The micro studio, yeah.
Yeah, the micro studio, which has, there's a HD version, which is a little bit cheaper. It does recording and streams out HD. There's a 4K version, which is about $1,300 US, which pumps out 4K but doesn't record locally. You can control it. It's pretty cool. For more price conscious, the Thor. So this is like Huddlecam on steroids. It's only $100 extra. As you can see, it's got USB and HDMI. It's got a quarter 20 on the bottom. It's straightforward. It's controlled via the software, via the USB. You can set it up, and then you just use HDMI to run it wherever you need.
Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah. Actually, second everything that Carl said. If I was starting now, I would actually check out the Thor. Now, from the 3 options that you mentioned, the Marshall is SDI out. So I would be considerate of how you're connecting your video, how you're switching. I'm using an ATEM, so I actually went for the Huddlecam, which is what I'm using here, and that is pretty zoomed in. And the cool thing about it is that it comes with a remote, so if I need to, pan and tilt it a little bit, I could do it like that. But for the price at the time, and since I am connecting through HDMI, I actually chose the Huddle, and it solved the problem for me.
Next, go ahead, Jeffrey.
One thing, of course, being a drummer, I have GoPro 4s overhead on my drums, and the reason why is because I've tried the 9s and they're just really problematic especially if you're trying to do a straight stream. But if you decide to do it on drums or keyboards, you might want to put on shock mounts onto those cameras because those stands are going to move around a little bit as you go, especially those little itty bitty vibrations.
We've had issues. Rolling shutter and drums don't get along really well in that process. You just get this kind of jello vision if you're picking up that vibration. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, one last thing on those is just your ability to dig into the menus and tweak the color. There was one day when Alex and I were going through this fish tank and trying to match colors, and it was pretty amazing how much you can change it. Whereas some of the other ones, it's just like brightness, contrast, and that's all you get. Whereas with the Huddlecam, you do get to go pretty deep into some of those to try and get them to match your main camera somewhat. I mean, it's not going to be perfect at that price point, $299. So you get what you get at that price.
Yep. Next question.
And just note, Jesse's camera's gotten much better looking. Mark Horner in Seattle, Washington says, strong hiss in my audio chain this morning. Ultimately solved the issue by turning the Furman PL-8C conditioner off and then back on. What might be the issue? There was no hiss last night, and I hadn't changed settings.
That's super weird. Go ahead, Jason.
And my guess is it doesn't have anything to do with the Furman, but some sort of capacitor that had messed up that the Furman was powering. But I can only tell you what it's not what it is.
Yeah, it seems like maybe something else turned off when you turn it on and off, because the Furman itself shouldn't create any hiss itself. I would try to isolate what else is plugged into that. But I think that you might have reset something else in the system than the Furman. I can't imagine how the Furman would add hiss and then take it away. Next question.
And apologies, I've got some landscaping happening here. Douglas Carmichael is up next. He says, have any of you worked with crew that have chronic medical issues on site? What steps do you take to work with their specific needs? And have you ever had medical staff on site?
Go ahead, Carl.
So the best thing to do if you're in control of that situation, have a one-on-one talk with them. Ask them what they need. So it's better to talk to them first, really, because you may get a different response from different people. So have a one-on-one with them first, and then go from there.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely dealt with, not dealt with, but just managed it. Everybody's got issues, like everybody. So, you just want to figure out how you customize their experience, and some people need more customization than others. And so it's just a matter of figuring those things out. Usually someone who has some specific needs will let you know what those are. And then it's just a matter of designing around it. We've designed around, for instance, wheelchairs. We just make sure that we've got everything, wound up to where it needs to be. Dietary restrictions, we, just make sure that stuff is managed. So it's just a matter of, but that is also, there's some people who, don't like it to be too hot or too cold, or, those are all things that, and you try to figure out what those are. But taking care of your team is super important, and stepping out of your way to make sure that the team's taken care of. And I haven't always been known for that. So it's something that I learned over time, that I would save you the trouble that I went through to learn over time, because I grew up in kind of a much harder environment. And so I was kind of not that interested in what people had that were personal issues, but learned that you get incredible crews, and they work really hard, and they're really effective when you figure out ways to take care of them. And that comes down to everything from the food and the water and the coffee to all the other things. And especially someone who has special needs, if you're able to manage that effectively, then you just end up with someone a lot more committed to the project. Go ahead, Grant, and then George.
Yeah, I think about trying to put the crew first often, and there's sometimes where they just need to be released from the job that you're on, and I mean that they have something going on. Some emergencies happened, or it's physical, or it's mental, or family, or whatever, and I'm very quick to just say absolutely, because ultimately I think what is best for them is actually best for our show. Because if they're not focused on, they're distracted, it's going to be a bigger problem than us just replacing them, and so, but that comes across as actually saying, yes, you need to be released. Absolutely. Go now. We'll make it work.
Good, George.
So in the DC area, I've pretty much worked with the same crews over the past 20 years. I normally don't divulge everything that's going on with me, but there's folks, generally we know, like I know when somebody's going to have surgery, somebody's got a cancer situation going on. So we know what's going on with each other. So if something was to happen, or we're able to keep track of each other. Not everyone does that in their area, but it's a core of us that kind of keep abreast of what's going on.
Next question.
Comes from Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. And he says, once world travel COVID-19 restrictions are relaxed somewhat, how many of the panelists are considering moving either from their current city to a more rural environment and or to a country like perhaps Australia or New Zealand?
My wife likes where we live a lot. So we're probably going to stay here. But I know that I have so many friends that are moving. Like I've never seen so much people. I've just never seen anything like it. Like it's just that it just started, but they're again, we're in California, so people can sell their house, go buy a house in the Midwest with cash, and can be completely out of debt. And I think and I've seen people doing that, and that's why they're not going back to work immediately. And that's why or one of the spouses is not going back to work because they don't need to anymore, and they've just decided. I think that COVID created a huge reset for a lot of people of what they thought was important and what they, wanted to do. And I think that we're going to continue to see that over the next decade, where we're going to see we'll see in the United States, at least, a ruralification of a lot of people reorganizing. The only thing that's slowing that down is bandwidth. like, so for states and municipalities, the number one thing they can do to reinvigorate their towns, especially in the flyover states, is to make sure that they've got 1 gig up and 1 gig down. That's relatively inexpensive. That's literally, I had a friend that just moved to the Midwest. I won't get into exactly where, but it was 1 gig up, 1 gig down was the requirement, and they found a place, and they're not coming back. So Charles.
Yeah, we've considered actually moving to Texas and other places. Right now, we have some properties here in this area, so we want to stay around here. But another consideration that we've had was the tax incentives for each particular states. That's where you've had a lot of people move to Puerto Rico lately because of what's going on there. So that's been a very big thing, that we've considered.
Go ahead, Leland.
As someone who's been in Michigan all his life and has never actually lived in another state, we have considered not only for the atmosphere, the weather, there's always the mix of politics and media that's taking place that's making it very difficult. But I have to second on Alex's concept that nowadays when you look for a house, if you can't find gigabit internet, you got to look somewhere else, it seems. So definitely priorities to set there, but we're definitely looking for a more arid environment, a little wet up here in Michigan and has been. So that's really my big thing.
I mean, in our industry, there's never been a time. I mean, this has been the case for a while. I mean, that you could work anywhere, but it's been a little bit of an edge case. The big thing is that it's suddenly normalized, and that normalization of that remote work where it's not stigmatized, where you're going to see half of Facebook and half of Twitter and half of these other companies all working remote. It means that you can move or be remote, and all the infrastructure is getting built up around it. And as that continues to solidify, you're going to see a lot more people continue to take advantage of it. And it's the hard part is it's really good for people who are really good at what they do, because they now can pick where they live and pick where they work. And those two things don't have to be connected. It's harder for folks, for both companies and individuals that are kind of in the middle. It's going to be much harder for them, because the companies now can cherry pick to pick the best people, and they don't have to persuade them to move. And the individuals can pick where they want to work and don't have to move. And so there's going to be some social issues that we have to deal with related to the people in the middle, and the companies in the middle are going to have a hard time, because a lot of them are getting, right now, a lot of larger companies and more effective companies are literally going through their ranks and just stealing people, because they're without that move. There's just so many people that don't work at big companies or the company that they want to, because they don't want to leave St. Louis, or they don't want to leave, Pittsburgh or whatever, and so their family's there, et cetera. And now that's all going to start shifting. Go ahead, Jason, and then Doug.
Yeah, as someone who grew up, speaking of Pittsburgh, for about 45 minutes from Pittsburgh, and Leland's being very familiar with where you live. Welcome to Albuquerque. You'd really like it here. But yeah, no, really.
We got close. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can work. You can do. I have clients all over the world.
Yeah,
it doesn't. It no longer matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Doug.
People, please pray for me. I'm moving Wednesday, and
where are you moving, Doug?
Moving to Indianapolis, so 2 hours south of where I'm at now, but I don't even know what day it is. Like, I have a show tonight. I have a show Thursday, and I had shows yesterday, and I don't even have anything packed.
Go ahead, Bill.
You need me, Doug.
I do think there's going to be a migration, but I think there's going to be a percentage of that is going to go back, because I think there's a little bit of the grass is greener syndrome going on here. I learned from all my traveling as a young man that any place that people care about you is a good place to live, and any place where people don't care about you is a lousy place to live. Right. So if you find your community, if you find people who have that bond with you, you will love where you live. And if you don't, you won't.
And as a country boy, I would say it's easier to find that outside of the city. Anyway, go ahead, Stephen. Can't hear you, Stephen.
Yeah, a few years ago, before COVID, getting people in the Bay Area for call centers and stuff, really expensive. So we went and looked where the speed was, and we started doing micro centers, like in the old Sears that was downtown. Right. We just got the top floor. And it was amazing how cheap that was per square foot. And the people we got were fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the people are already there in some cases.
I mean, I think that's the big thing is that up until now, a lot of companies have been limited to what they geographically had access to, and they don't have that. That's going away, and so over the next decade, there's just going to be a giant migration of people moving around. So it's going to be, and there's going to be a bunch of problems with that too. Again, there's just going to be a lot of folks that have to figure out how to be competitive in that environment, and that's going to be more difficult. Next question.
Chris Earl of Maitland, Florida says, anyone old enough to remember the terminal looking 3/4, 40 seconds analog countdown dial clock, probably with some text, that would precede TV shows, at least in the UK? What were those, and what were their purposes?
A lot of those were sync signals to let everybody know what time it actually was. Back then, you didn't have a watch or a computer or whatever. So some of those clocks would come up at certain times, and you just knew that you could actually literally set your clock to it, and it was going to give you an accurate view of that time. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm just old enough to remember when TV wasn't a 24-hour circumstance. When I was a little kid, TV went off the air at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. They'd play the national anthem and High Flight, the poem, and then it would go to a little dot in the center of the screen with a 1K tone until the next morning, and it started up again. So things change over the course of time, and you just have to get.
We went from it's not open all the time to it's opened all the time to it's not open at all. Anyway, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, Chris, to answer your question, those were the analog precursors to the digital, tri-sync and blackburst, and digital time code that is now automatic.
Good, Carl.
So in Australia, as Bill said, TV turned off at like midnight, then turned back on about 6 a.m. And if you're a kid on Saturday morning, you want to wake up and watch your cartoons, the thing you would see would be this. You'd just be watching this and go, cartoons coming soon, cartoons are coming soon. And that's what they've just broadcast for 6 to 8 hours.
Yeah. Next question.
Brian Carpenter of Cleveland, Ohio says, I'm looking for advice regarding a speaker system to play music from a smartphone to fill a typical suburban backyard of approximately 20 to 30 meters in diameter. It would be nice to have quality sound without blowing out the neighbors or killing the party chat.
Go ahead, Jason.
More importantly than your speakers themselves is going to be how you are syncing them. I would say AirPlay 2 is a very easy way to do this. As far as powered speakers, assuming they'll tolerate the weather, a monoprice couple of powered ones I think would work fairly nicely.
Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I think probably get in the 15-inch speaker range. Mackie makes a really good one. If you want to go cheaper, a lot of beginning DJ people use the Gemini 15-inch. The biggest thing for you, though, is to get it on a stand, get it up higher in the air. Otherwise, it's just going to be this kind of muffly noise that comes from the corner of the yard. And as far as the volume, you can turn it down. So you'll have quality a little bit better, and you can, turn it up as needed or down as needed, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse, and then Bill.
So I have a pair of Polk outdoor speakers that sound pretty good. I started going cheap and I bought some Amazon special for $40. They did not sound good. The Polk sound a lot better, and they weren't that expensive. They were a couple $100. But then what really improved the sound was I bought an outdoor rated subwoofer to amp up the bass, and that sounds great.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I'm a big fan of fewer, smaller, more diverse speakers than a big PA system. I've owned PA systems, and I've had parties with the kids and others with the PA speakers in the backyard, and almost all of them resulted in a call at some point from the local authorities going, we've had some complaints about things. So if I was going to do it, particularly with the OPs, the original posters, without blowing out the neighbors or killing party chat. The party chat can be difficult if you've got big PAs. So more diverse speakers in more areas that are lower so people can talk over them is my solution.
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So I've actually been asked this question, and this is what I've always recommended. So this is the bottom of the Turbo Sound series. It has 6 mid-range at the top, so you're getting them off the ground, and it's got the woofer. So this is Bluetooth. Not only is it Bluetooth audio, it's also Bluetooth controlled. There's an app that actually allows you to control it as well, not just stream the audio.
And Todd?
Not only did he have my idea, but he had a slide to back it up. So I yield my time.
Go ahead, Chris.
If you're looking for something maybe a little bit more like battery powered, I'm kind of with Bill with the more smaller speakers, the JBL Flip series. You can buy as many, I think they allows up to 40 speakers to be run off of a single Bluetooth device. And they're about like that big. They're waterproof, Bluetooth, rechargeable, and they can be placed around the backyard, and you can just add more speakers as you need them. And they're like $100 a piece, and you can get larger ones that have more bass response, and you can just like mix and match them and even make them stereo. So it splits half and half, or they all just play both sides at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, one of to go back to this, I mostly I've had to install a lot of these in a younger age. This is what I did, and what we did was a lot of smaller speakers. You know, so the speakers, to Bill's point, we would either around the perimeter or around it. We protect for an area that needed announcements, so that you don't have speakers going into that area, so that someone can pick up a SMPTE and they're not getting feedback. But outside of that, you'd cover them, and a lot of times it was every 10 or 15 feet we would have a speaker. The thing you have to know, if you're not doing powered speakers, if you're going to run speaker wire out to them, you have to really pay attention to impedance. So you have to start to think, you know, there's some math there to figure out, you know, how, you know, so you don't overload your amps. But we did it with, you know, we did it with kind of dumb speakers. The Bose outdoor speakers is what we mostly used for those installs. They're really rugged and they sound relatively good. But lots of speakers is what's going to allow you to have a lower conversation. And a lot of times, like in that space, I probably put 10 speakers in there, you know, like, and keep them. And then if you have a fence, you keep them below the fence line. So above, as high as you can, but below the fence line, because that'll kill a lot of the audio leaving it, and your neighbors will get along with you a lot better than if you put a couple big speakers in the front. Go ahead, Stephen, and then Leland, real quick.
I just want to say you can rent this stuff too, so you don't have a garage full of speakers and all this stuff when this is over.
Yeah, go ahead, Leland.
Yeah, along Chris Comfort's line, Bose made a SoundLink Resolve Plus, which is a portable device that's also waterproof that you can set out in your yard. It's a 360 speaker, so it actually gives you the little bit of unlimited cap that you don't get on separate speakers. Sorry about that image, by the way. I got stuck in my video there. But it's going to at least give you that ability to put it right out in the middle of the event and kind of get that surround sound through one device. So give it.
And the best thing to do is not complain about your neighbors when they make a lot of noise, because then they can't complain about you. so it's, you know, it's, you know, the best thing that someone told me once in Zimbabwe was that, you know, when you get, if you're going to live there for a long time, when you get into a fight with your neighbor, they're still your neighbor tomorrow. Go ahead, Jason.
It's not clear to me, based on the question, whether or not this is a permanent installation, or if he wants to, you know, bring them out and take them and leave them like tiki torches or something for a particular event. That's really going to make more of a difference than just about anything.
Yeah. Next question.
Moving to Andre Dole in Berlin, and he says, since office hours shifted to 2.0, audio nearly always seems not to be in sync, neither on YouTube nor on Zoom. Will this be solved soon, or is it too heavy to achieve with actual setup?
So we're not doing anything right now. So I get that there was some sync issues last week, and that's one of the reasons that we're going back to this until we can figure those out. So if they're out of sync now, it is Zoom. We are streaming from Zoom to YouTube. There's no way, none of our infrastructure is in between. And we're doing that specifically to get a baseline for what we're doing. In the next couple of days, we'll start streaming screen scrapes as a separate stream so that we can compare the sync between the two, but we're trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. And we do actually have a theory that it may be actually Zoom that's out of sync. So we're looking at that right now. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, I've noticed that when I'm on Wi-Fi, the YouTube feed streams a lot more smoothly than the Zoom webinar feed. I'm using an 802.11n access point. Is that because YouTube is using an adaptive codec?
All right, go ahead, Jason.
Maybe, but more importantly, it's because Wi-Fi really isn't designed for the latency needed for video conferencing.
Yeah, there's a buffer. So when you're watching it on Zoom, there's no buffer. You're getting it as fast, you know, within milliseconds of when we set it. So there's no room for error. When you're watching it on YouTube, we don't use the ultra low latency or anything else. We use normal latency, which is somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds of latency. So you're absolutely going to get a better solution than Zoom. And it's something that we're talking about a lot of, whether it's worth, you know, for everyone's experience, it could be better to just be watching it on YouTube if we sync everybody up. Part of the problem we have right now is that If you're watching on YouTube, you're behind people watching on Zoom. If we just put everybody in the same place, it would be the same experience for everybody. So all the chat and the questions and everything else would sync back up again. So it's a consideration there. Leland, real quick.
I just wanted to ask, curiosity wise, why you're not using the lower bandwidth version of YouTube to broadcast.
Because it breaks up the lower latency. So there's two reasons. Number one is that it's more susceptible to break up. All YouTube's doing on a low latency or ultra low latency is take away your buffer. So they're just removing they're moving the safety from it. And if we were limited to the poor comment tools that are inside of YouTube, then we would need to do that, go to lower latency, because you're now trying to sync yourself up with the comment stream, which is insane. Like the comment, the reason that people want low latency is because their comment system stinks. And so we have a better comment system. We have a better chat. We have a better Q&A system. And the latency on the actual questions is sometimes an hour, but definitely more than a couple of minutes, because we actually want the questions in our system to sit in the system for a little while so that the viewers can actually, the producers can actually vote on them. So we don't actually want to be instantaneous. We want a moment for the producers to look at those questions, think about them, vote them up and down. And so we don't need the low latency. Low latency is a function of bad comment systems. Next question.
Tim Holmes, San Lorenzo, here on the panel, says there's a new Stream Deck software. Does anyone see some great upside or usable new features specific to streaming and media creation?
I haven't played with it.
Yeah, that came out like yesterday. I haven't played with it at all.
I think it came out last week, but we keep on saying, come back to us a little bit, but we still haven't got it into the system yet. Next question.
Al Torrance in Kingston, Ontario, Canada is in with, would internet bonding being an important addition to portable kit? And would you consider a hardware device as a primary go-to, or would there be an option to use a software setup such as Speedify loaded into a Mac Mini or suitable Windows machine?
Bonding's useful if it's not two-way. Go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, but the thing is that the thing that bonding you have to remember is that it has to it splits the packets and sends them down those separate connections. It then has to go to the same endpoint to put them back together to then go back out again. So a VPN is what Speedify is doing, is a VPN which is split across those connections. But in order for it to do that, it's got to bounce off to another server, put it back together, and then send it back. So it can work, and Speedify actually does do some trickery with real-time connections like with Zoom, which decreases it and kind of helps it along the way. But it's not great for that sort of thing. It works pretty well for live streaming, for pushing out, just pushing a bunch of packets out. It's not so bad for that. But in general, that two-way stuff is not great.
And go ahead, Jason.
Grant's answer was far more verbose and much clearer, I think, but I'm going to try to put it in two sentences. You better really understand networking or really have a lot of money if you're going to start bonding.
Yeah, and for streaming, we've used it for years. I mean, for a decade. So the one-way communication is fine. It's just that it amplifies the jitter, and so you just end up with a lot of misaligned frames. If you have the buffer, it's fine. It'll realign them and make it all work. And live views work this way, and TVUs and Dojeros and all those are bonding those. And we use PEP waves to do that, but we don't expect them to work in a synchronous two-way connection. Next question.
Chris Earl, Maitland, Florida. My ATEM Mini Extreme had chugging sub 1/4 frames per second out of the USB webcam output, regardless of the ATEM's input source. The HDMI output, one at least, was fine. A restart fixed it, but curious if the panel had thoughts on what might have happened.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, this is a recurring issue. And yeah, of course, you can unplug the ATEM from power and from USB-C, restart the whole thing, plug it back in. That is the most common thing. But before you even get there, be sure you're going straight in to your computer. Don't use a hub. Really, just don't.
Yeah, the two things that we've seen that are the most common are hubs, in that connection, and also if you are using a USB-C to USB-A into the computer. So you really, if you can at all make it work, you want the USB-C to USB-C, from from the ATEM straight into the computer with nothing in between and no conversion, no nothing. And then it seems to work relatively. We still see about once a week. My ATEM, for instance, just won't show up on Zoom, but we're not sure if that's a Zoom thing or it always works. Like literally while it's not working in Zoom, it's working fine in QuickTime. So it's some kind of Zoom interface issue there. Next question.
Chris Earle in Maitland, Florida is back with you. Mentioned pinning participants to individual Zoom clients plus hardware, PCs, he assumes, instances to have discrete video feeds for routing elsewhere, typically into a switcher, I assume. How is that process managed, manual or automated and so forth?
For us, it's manual. Like someone goes into each room and goes, I'm going to pin you. Now, what we do is we have multiple computers and each one of them is just what we tend to refer to as permapinned. You know, there'll be like 4 people that are speaking that are just pinned. And then there might be another, and this is if we're having Zoom rooms join a meeting to grab onto people and we're not doing individual rooms for each person. And then we may have 1 or 2 computers that we're pinning in real time of that person, or leave it to just speaker view and let it just throw up the person who's talking. And sometimes it's one will be doing that. Another one will be kind of a ad hoc pin setup. Yeah, go ahead, Grant.
I'm just interested, Alex. You changed last week. You changed to having them all in the same meeting. Mm-hmm. What did that feel like for you? Did you really notice that latency drop?
Yeah, yeah, definitely did. You know, I can definitely feel it. It's a more responsive conversation. It did have the idiosyncrasies that we know already occur with that situation, which is we had a little bit of audio bleed in here and there. There was some more, there was a couple glitches that weren't all related to that, but there were a couple things that didn't pop the way we expected it to because they were in a different place. So there are challenges with that mixed environment. I do think that if we can get it working where we can pull ISOs from every ISO audio and video, but still have people in this environment that we see here for this show, that's the best of both worlds, in my opinion, as far as how that works. Go ahead, Doug, and then Leland.
Yeah, I'm actually setting up a show for tonight on the TriCaster doing the same thing. And right now, as I'm doing things, I am positioning different sources and making these graphics as they are, so that my Zoom meeting does not look like a regular meeting. And how I'm doing this, like Alex does, is the various computers. We have just a lot of them, but to get a clean output, you need a second monitor for each computer. So it's a ton of gear for me right now. And all these sources are coming in NDI. But in the end, the client loves it, and it looks like TV rather than a Zoom meeting.
Yep. We got Leland.
And as someone who backed up Doug on one of his productions and had to come in and replace 6 of his computers, we tried a little different approach, and that was using virtual machines on 2 PCs. I was able to log into each of the breakout rooms on individual accounts, which then allows me to go full screen on 6 separate monitors, capture all that in NDI in both audio and video, and bring them into the switcher in any way that I want to use.
Next question.
Comes from Chris Earle again, Maitland, Florida, and he says, I HDMI out via dongle to my M1 MacBook Air, then to a 49-inch 4K TV for my only monitor, unless I AirPlay to a TV. Are there any video performance reasons I'd want to leave the laptop screen open, set to mirroring with mismatched resolution favoring the TV?
Go, Jason.
There are plenty, but I'm going to give you a one better on that. There are profound reasons to plug in an external or Bluetooth keyboard, connect directly in, and then just shut the clamshell, and the MacBook will power right back up. That's going to give you so many more of your resources because you're not powering an ancillary unnecessary display.
Yep, Carl.
Yeah, exactly what Jason said. So go to clamshell mode, close the laptop itself, so it's only got one monitor to worry about, and you can go at full 4K resolution.
Yep. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next with Apple is surveying developers about whether they'd be willing to return to an in-person WWDC after 2 years of an all-online dub. Considering the reduced production and attendee cost, why would Apple be looking to return to a less inclusive model?
Go ahead, Jason.
Because Apple is an intelligent company that is not going to make a decision on something that is so popular with the people that make their software really, really great.
Go ahead, Charles.
And they've also are really good at collecting data, analyzing, and seeing the trajectory and trends. So I think that's what they're trying to do right now. They're trying to see where people want to go.
There are things, as someone who's been dubbed a lot because of my work, there are things that are not being reproduced in the online version very effectively, and it's just the technology hasn't been there yet. So I think that Apple is going to need a couple of years. The whiteboard. So the big thing that is valuable in DubDub is one of the few places where I'd say it's really valuable to be hanging out and talking to the programmers. It's really hard, the programmers talking to each other are really great, but hanging out with the Apple engineers with big whiteboards and talking through your problems and working through those is a different experience on the video side. And I don't think that they've solved that problem yet. I think they could, but I think that they would need another couple, probably 3 or 4 versions of this to get there. So I think that the meeting with the engineers, and then of course 2 programmers sitting next to each other, on their laptops talking, just socially, I think actually makes sense. I think there's a lot of things that DubDub does in a in-person way that that's very valuable, and I think it actually makes the case for doing that to make it available. I think that the sessions are probably not going to come back. The sessions, just streaming people on stage is not, now you can record them. They're at their best moment all the time. You're able to cut it exactly the way you want it. You can release them all at the same time. There's so much less stress during the show, because you're not dealing with those live presentations, and you can just focus on what makes it different, which is hanging out with the engineers. So I think that Apple, I think it totally behooves them to continue to do a real person one. And then I think you provide the same level of service that you would do you still keep on working on those whiteboard sessions and those engineering sessions and so on and so forth. But you just get rid of just let people download and watch the sessions. I think that's the thing that you don't need to have anymore. Go ahead, Bill.
Also, just remember, they just recently, just before COVID, opened a planetary class facility with the Steve Jobs Theater and the Apple Ring campus. And it is an inspirational place to be. I've been lucky enough to be on campus, and it just gives you the feeling of a company who's doing something really special.
But DubDub's not there.
It's very close. I understand sure, there's a facility that's... Yeah, it's going to be. Yeah,
so DubDub's not going to. DubDub is still at San Jose. San Jose Convention Center, and still that's pretty far away from the Apple campus. But and I think that the keynotes. I'd be really surprised if the keynotes come back to stage. Other than, I think that the place that you could possibly see it is them going. They'd have executives up here. Let's watch another movie. And let's watch, and I think that you could see them, if they want to have the stage experience, they just go back to lots of video, because you could never cover the amount of information that they cover now in the video, on stage. It would just be, I think it would feel really slow. Go ahead, Grant.
I think this is an example of where both work, but not a hybrid.
Yeah.
It's 2 separate things. And so now you have an exclusive event for people in person, and all of those things Alex is talking about, you get in for that in-person event, and you don't try to do that at the same time as online.
Or you could do it at the same time in, the same...
It's a different event.
A different event, but happening at the same time, I think would totally make sense. I think they could continue to do exactly what they're doing now and have a physical expression of that as well, and it would be very successful for what they're doing.
And it's not hybrid.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael back again with the popular gig delivery app Roadie partnered with Crew Nation to support live music crews. Considering the skills needed to move to digital streaming, has there been any thought to outreach to those crew people to help them transition?
Yeah, we do this. This is what we're doing to do that. So there's a lot of thought about that. One of the reasons that we created this was so that we would be able to trade notes amongst each other and make something that was freely available for people to listen to or to watch or to ask questions in. So I think that is I don't know, that's as far as I'm going. I don't know if anyone else is doing anything else, but we're slowly organizing a large number of people that are all starting to hire each other inside of this community pretty often. So I think that it's a slow gel that's kind of building up. Next question.
Randall Willis, Greenville, South Carolina. First hour using Zoom PodTrack F4. Can one get a Lightning to XLR cable to record an interview on an Apple FaceTime call?
Go ahead, Carl.
So this is an excellent question. So Zoom's already thought of you. They actually make something. So this, you'll notice there's a 2.5 and a 3.5 jack holes on the side of your unit that you've never used. This is what it's for. So this adapter is actually set for Skype, Zoom, and FaceTime for podcasts coming in over those or ordinate. Yeah. So Alex has shown his Bluetooth ordinate, which is similar, but you wouldn't be able to get the audio. So that would be similar, but this actually just plugs straight into that recorder. It's designed for that recorder, and it will just link to your phone. So it's similar to Alex's ordinate thing that he uses to use in the, yeah.
Go ahead, Bill.
Also mentioned that Saramonic makes a Lightning to XLR adapter that has a 9-volt battery as powered, has Phantom, and will adapt the microphone directly into a Lightning port.
And Jason, you're showing, is that the Audinate?
Yeah, this is the studio version of the Audinate Dante adapter, and it is really slick. Yeah, they're expensive, but very slick.
I'm planning to use it. I haven't tested. I think sometime this week I'm going to test Twitter Spaces. It's finally, it's available to everyone now. And I opened it up and almost opened up a whole Twitter Spaces. And the problem is I have enough followers that I was like, oh, that'll be chaos. so I backed away. And so we'll do some little tests and see how that goes. But we're going to kind of move that direction. Next question.
Moving on, Peter Moore, Auckland, New Zealand is back with YouTube updated their Apple TV app a few weeks ago before the tvOS 15 beta and has addressed a few of my issues with like WRT clicking etc. and no longer interrupts the video. It's taken a little while to get used to the new UI, but I quite like it. Any thoughts on what YouTube has done with their Apple TV app?
Go ahead, Carl.
Yeah, it's now parity. The app on the Apple TV is now parity with the Android TV version. So they've actually just rolled over to their version.
The navigation is better. Like definitely with even the older controller, the navigation has gotten significantly better in the YouTube TV app. Yeah. Next question.
The Seven Scroll, Brooklyn, New York. Hi, guys. How do you all typically divvy up your ATEM Extreme inputs between computers? B-Links by Courtney, Mac Minis, laptops, etc. versus camera inputs?
I feel like I'm changing them all a lot. Generally my first 3 or 4 are cameras, and then I have one that's going in that's going to be my telestrator, and then I have various computers after that. That's kind of how mine's broken up. Go ahead, Steve or Jason.
For me, it's different for every single time I take it out of the bag. I mean, my studio rig is very different, but for the ATEM Extreme, typically I'm cameras first, faces first, screens second, alpha, and production kind of stuff after that.
Alex, did the big one give you up on the 5 cascaded ATEM minis that you were building out?
I did. I stopped using it. Although I am still strongly considering cascading the big one.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So the whole, there are good reasons for it. If you think about how many super sources that you would get, and then how many inputs that you would have, you could theoretically do the thing that we're talking about with, with pulling all the ISOs out and putting them all in there. If you figured it out, you could actually run the whole thing and have tons of super sources and tons of other things for the same. You'd actually have more capability than the Constellation in a lot of ways for the same price. You wouldn't have as many outputs, but you'd have more inputs at the same price. And so I haven't gone down that path yet, but I may try to borrow 8 of them just to put it together once and try to get it to work, and then just take a picture of it like that this existed, and then go back to what I was doing. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, just one more thought. A semi-pro way to do this also would be get a matrix switcher. That way it doesn't really matter how you're doing this.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's back with, I've seen concert event producers use scale cost as a selling point. Could a Rebel Mac unit crew deliver a quality experience with reduced cost by using compact equipment, easy to transport control surfaces, use of vMix, Mimo Live for video, and so forth?
Go ahead, Jason.
They sure could, and they never would, because that's really, I know that Apple comes across as this, we're real people too type company, but apps,
I think that what he's referring to is kind of the, when I was in Rebel Mac unit inside of ILM, it was just cheaper, faster with off-the-shelf hardware and software to do those things. And the problem you really get into when you get on site is that, you think that all that smaller controls are going to make it easier or something like that, and it actually makes it harder. A lot of the physical stuff that we put out in front of us and the extra monitors and the space that we take makes it easier for us to do our job in real time. So when something goes wrong, you really don't want, there's been a lot of the little touch screens and stuff like that. When you see someone say, "Oh, I'm going to cut a whole show on a touch screen," or "I'm going to mix a whole show on a touch screen," a lot of us just go, "Ooh, that's going to be," like that. And the other thing about it is that you have to remember that clients oftentimes equate the value of your services. I know this will sound crazy, but to the hardware that you show up with. So coming in really compact doesn't necessarily do what you think it will. They're not excited that you're really sometimes we build things that are small footprints because we've been given this tiny little space to work inside of. But if you give us the space, we'll generally expand into it because it's going to let us do our job better, and the clients also see where their money's going. Go ahead, Jason.
And my point was just that Apple will never sanction an alt Apple version of WWDC.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael again. One of the projects I've been thinking about is building a small lab studio rack for both certification review and supporting personal projects. This would not replace the certification, but would successful projects be an asset in hiring?
Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
I'll speak to the rack side of things. So I'm actually building a rack myself. So this is part of what I'm adding to my business is audio recording. So doing small orchestras and chamber music. So I am building a rack, and it will be a mobile rack, probably be 16U when it's finished, and that's about as big as I want to go. The whole point of me doing this is to add a value to my business, but also it's because it's something I want to do personally. Regardless of money, I like recording orchestras. Full stop. That's it.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I can elaborate a little bit more on racks. I have 3 of them in my studio, and they're both all 3 of them are 8U, and they each have distinct bespoke purposes. And so there is tremendous benefit to adding a rack if you just want to get back some table space, and your stuff's not going to change a lot.
Yeah, I think that the question here is really adding some kind of rack people can actually come and certify on. And we've talked about this for years, of being able to create something that people can kind of log into. One of the things we've talked about is putting a switcher on the internet and letting people log in and watch looping content of a show and then cut it and just get a sense of what it would be like to cut that show, with that piece and have it there. And so, so we're thinking about a bunch of things related to that, of making that available to folks. The way that we've done it up until now, and we want to get to a point where we can certify people all over the world. It's another much larger conversation that will not happen anytime soon. But the idea is that you want to know that you could send a kit out to your perspective, like a fly kit, and someone's certified to use it. Like we know that they know how to use it, and it's completely IP controllable, so that if they have a trouble with it, that's what we got good at the end of Pixel Core, which we were sending out kits that everything was accessible. So if an audio person had a problem, I didn't have to have a Brian Maddox at every show. I had Brian Maddox available, and we'd have 3 or 4 kits out there, and Brian could just log in and fix a couple things, and then the person could go back to moving the sliders around. And it's, and that was a very, very useful way to do this. Next question.
Georgie Kennedy Jr. here on the panel from Washington, D.C. How will Amazon eventually compete with Apple Music and Spotify? They've announced a Prime Day show.
Go ahead, George.
So this is it's interesting. I'm going to switch to my desktop here. They announced a Prime Day show, but I know Alex will get a kick out of this. But they're also going to do a watch party. So they obviously they have money to put into this kind of event. So it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. I don't know if they necessarily really want to compete with Apple Music or Spotify, but they're going to try to at least keep, in their distance, try to compete on some level.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
The real benefit is, in one word, AWS. The unbelievable scalability and flexibility and power that Amazon has spent years building into AWS is the only way that they would be able to compete in this front at all.
I think scalable watch parties will be pretty popular. And to Jason's point, I think that AWS probably has a better grip on that than anyone else of setting that up, because they already have the infrastructure that would be not very hard to execute. But people keep on thinking about watch parties as 10 people or 20 people rather than 50,000 or 100,000. And when they get over that weird thing, there's no reason for them not to be able to do that, because all those people are just watching they're all just watching at the same time. It's not, it's a very low, it's not live streaming to all of those folks. But when they get when companies get their head around it, I think we're going to see some competition in that area, because if you're going to do a live stream or a watch party 2 days or 3 days after the event with the director and have questions and answers and so on and so forth, it drives viewership for that weekend. Like everyone's thinking about that show, because they're going to get to have that conversation, and that conversation is not valuable anymore if you hadn't seen it. So there's a lot of possibility there, and they just have to get their head around doing it. Go ahead, Leland.
One thing a lot of people don't realize is over the last several years, Amazon's been catering to really the high-end movie producers, because they're looking for good movie quality content, episodic content, which, believe it or not, as a regular producer, broadcaster, you can apply for the Amazon setup to actually build episodic content on a regular basis if that's your thing. So the whole AWS thing is obviously a second, but the other part is the shopping network. It's kind of its own little shopping network in itself, where you can create videos weird. To sell your stuff, and
it's weird.
Like got a lot of different ways.
I think Jeffrey does a pretty good job of his. I've seen some of Jeffrey's, and he does a better job. But outside of Jeffrey, I haven't seen very many where I was like, that would have been better if they'd put a little time into it. It's just that they're like, I can turn my iPad on, and so I think that's been the problem is that, and the hard part people don't get is if you don't put the time and effort into it, it damages the entire. Amazon would be better off having a lot less people with multi-camera and looking good and sounding good than having everybody be able to pick up every influencer be able to pick up their phone and stream, because it just lowers the overall quality of the experience. And so that's the problem with their current platform. That's what a lot of platforms have trouble with. And so that I think is the challenge for them. There's a lot of places that are still competable in this area. They just the music. I do think spatial will be kind of table stakes soon. And I think that and then more video production. Next question. We're gonna run out of time here.
Andrew Dolly in Berlin is back with, I have an upcoming hybrid event in Microsoft Teams, which gets streamed to YouTube. There are up to 3 panelists in Teams on an ATEM Extreme-based based setup. How would the panel input the panelist? And is there a possibility to control Teams with shortcuts or something similar?
Go ahead, Grant.
I would just say it's like the first thing in your first sentence, hybrid, Teams, it's like there's a couple of hits there. But if you have to do it, which sometimes you do, I would look at, and would normally say this, but because Teams does have NDI output, you might find it easier to be able to do some of the work through NDI and do a software switch. The other thing I'd just give as a free advice is that I did an event like this, like what you're talking about, where I had panelists in person as well, and I was surprised at how well it worked to generate a gallery view of the people that were on the stage as well. There was 3 people on stage and 3 people remote, and I made a gallery view that I pushed to everywhere. And it worked incredibly well, where it was an individual person, and now it was a level playing field, whether they were in person or online, and it looked the same whether the audience was in person or online.
Yeah, go ahead, Leland, and then Jason, real quick.
I just want to let anyone know that's watching on YouTube, there's a link that was dropped in Mukana for the keyboard shortcuts on Teams, and that'll show up in the chat replay on Discord.
That's great. And I would agree with Grant, and I'm sure Leland, that I'd probably look at a NDI switching solution if I was using Teams because of its support. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, one more. Switcher without, mix minus. Yeah. I think the NDI is the right way to do this. Use the ATEM for your production style, downstream keying, and eventual encoding.
Next question.
Craig Yotes, Gridley, Kansas, second to the last. How can VR Oculus be used for WWDC in an effective way?
I don't
They'd
think
have
you
to
can.
really change their stream.
So I mean, we did the first 4K. Let's see, the first 4K stereo, 4K per eye stereo live stream from Connect 3 or 4 or whatever years ago, and so I've done a bunch of these, and I've done a bunch of Mat events and everything else. I just don't think it's a very good experience. Like it's not like it actually generally, until we get to 6K or 8K per eye, at 60 frames a second, which is going to be it's coming, but until we get to that, the experience is kind of just wonky. Like it's something that's cool, just not something that's useful. Go ahead, Jesse, and then Jason real quick.
Yeah, when I was hearing the Unreal people talk about their latest lighting engine for Unreal 5, they talked about, someone asked the question about VR, and they were saying when you do VR, you have to have extremely high frame rate, otherwise it's nauseating. So streaming and super high frame rate don't really go together.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's just that. For some people it is nauseating, and it just is. You really need 60 frames a second minimum, and I would say closer to 90 or 120 is where you really start, and then it's 6 to 8K per eye, and then you start getting to that, and now you're in a position where you really feel like you're there, and those exist in the lab. I just haven't seen them. They're just a little ways away from being a production unit that costs less than $100,000 a unit. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, and if I remember that event correctly, you were using either one or two $90,000 extremely proprietary cameras.
They were only $60,000.
Oh,
there was
$60,000.
Yeah, there was 5. We were cutting between 5 different cameras, 5 different Ozo cameras, and so those were. There's a whole story there, but the first 2 were 60. The first one was 60,000. The next 2 were 30,000 each. We got some sale on them or something, and then the last 3 were 7,500. So at one point I had 6 of them, and the worst part is that Nokia announced they were dropping the Ozo the day before the Connect. The day before we did the biggest thing that's ever been done with their Ozos, they killed the program. It was just it was funny. Anyway, next question.
And the final one today, Douglas Carmichael says, with many production professionals having left the industry for more stable pastures, I've read 30 to 40% in one article, he says, are producers and promoters having challenges finding experienced crew for said in-person events?
I haven't heard one way or the other, because a lot of the in-person events haven't ramped up yet. Most of the companies that I'm working with are still waiting for 2022 to see how that goes. Some adventurous ones are talking about the fall of 2021. I will predict that if this Delta variant picks up speed and they have to cancel 2021's fall's events, the in-person event industry will never recover, because it's just too much chaos, and they'll just give up, because they're close to it now. Like a lot of people are just this yo-yoing thing that's going on as the other technologies come up. So the fall will be really interesting for us to watch. Go ahead, Bill.
I do think that almost everybody you see on this panel is in this industry because we self-selected to be into this. I mean, it's hard to get started in this. It's hard to do it. It's that weird combination. You have to be kind of a little business, and you have to be kind of a little creative, and you have to be really hardworking, and just a lot of things that are not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. Yes, from the outside, it can look glamorous when you're backstage with your fingers on the buttons of a fancy show that is making everybody applaud at the right moments and all those things, but there's just a ton of hard work. So I do think the people who do this will continue to do something like this, but the what may be changing underneath us.
It's a grind, like especially for in-person events. I mean, there's a handful of us that are doing stuff, but if you're just working electrical, or you're working on setup things and everything else, all that stuff that makes it work, it's fun the first couple of times, and then after that, it's just a grind. And so, I think that the fact that they found other things to do because there was nothing else available, I doubt that infrastructure is going to be built up real quickly again. And so that is going to be more problematic for folks. And I think that, again, I think for in-person, I know that we're way out there, but the math isn't going to add up over time. So I think that there's going to be the doing in-person events just isn't the ROI. In the end, it's always going to be about money, as Sky would say, follow the money, and eventually the ROI is going to be higher for digital events, and that's what's going to be kind of where we see a lot of this stuff kind of slide out. Go ahead, Jason, and then Leland.
looking at the time, I will cut my answer way down to +1 on what Bill said. And you in order to do this, yes, of course it's a grind, and the difference between falling into it and not being able to imagine your life without it is the difference between good and great.
And for 90% of the people that work on a physical, an in-person event, it's not that fun. there's for 10% of us, it's you're doing something cool and you don't have to load in, you don't have to carry a lot of stuff, and you don't have to deal with all the stuff. But for 90% of the people that are the people that actually make this happen for an in-person event, it's just a job. like you're moving stuff around. Again, there's us in the core that Bill's talking about that have worked on it, and we're part of the technicians and everything else. But what they're having trouble filling right now are the people who are willing to come in for $10 an hour, $15 an hour, and push carts around and do catering and do there's 9 of those for every one of us that's just doing the actual content. Go ahead, Leland.
I was just going to add on to the fact that if education and government are any 2 examples that we can take under our wing in all of this, we're seeing that shift from the virtual or from the physical to the virtual already taking place. So as we continue to move ahead, more industries are just simply going to grab onto that concept.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we've gotten to the end. See the 2-hour thing, I think it's a good change of pace. Is to switch these over, but we're going to have a great. Bill is going to be hosting the next 2 days for us, and hopefully we'll be able to drag Guy into doing some Q&A for us over the next couple of days. So Bill's going to be hosting there. We're going to have recording orchestras, which I am going to listen to right after it's done. But I'm in a record tomorrow morning. Not recording an orchestra, I wish. So stay tuned for that. And then Wednesday's general discussion. And Todd Reynolds, as I said, is going to come in on Thursday and talk about what he does. So we're excited about that. And then Friday, the remotes are back with a new song, which they'll be rolling out for all of you. So it's good. It's going to be a good week. We're going to jump into the post show. Thanks to the producers for the great questions. You kept it perfectly timed. We got right near the end. Great job by the panelists for another great conversation. Somehow we just keep doing it. 400 plus. We just keep on ratcheting along. We're going to get to 500 sooner or later. We'll have to have another party, an online party where we sing happy birthday to ourselves in a horrible way. But, it has to be done. All right. See you on the other side.